Hi, Rick. Thank you so much
Hey,
for joining me on the Hunter
thanks for
Way
inviting me. Glad to be
podcast.
here.
Lovely to see you. Rick, if it was okay, can we start just with you giving a little bit of introduction about who you are, maybe a little bit in your background and your current position in NAUMD, and maybe a little bit about your background. I remember you're a very technology oriented guy, and I think we're going to probably touch into bits and pieces of technology oriented things that affect our industry globally during this chat. But over to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Rick Levine. I am the executive director of the Network Association of Uniform Manufacturers and Distributors. We typically just say the letters out loud. We go NAUMD. And we are a collection of a few hundred companies around the planet, but mostly centered and centric to North America. We're a
Sure.
90-year-old trade association for,
Well,
U.S. companies. I came about this
are
because,
you 90 years old this year?
yes, I am 90
Well,
years old. I mean, I dyed my hair, so
um,
uh,
because interestingly, and I did not know about this, but we are also 90 years old. My company,
no
Hunter,
way. Oh,
is 90
wow.
year old this year as well. Funny.
That's amazing. All right. Well, we share that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So I published a magazine for the uniform industry for about 20 years. And then when the internet, the web browser came along, an offshoot of the publishing company, we started, we built a SaaS platform, a software as a service platform to manage the e-commerce websites for uniform companies. And
Okay.
that grew to, we were managing about 1,000 online stores. Uh,
Well,
and um, and then I got out of that. The company's still around. It's called Sellers Commerce now. It's still around. And then I went. And then I'd been a member of this association for 25 plus years,
okay.
wearing different hats. And then the board, asked if I was interested in running it. And very pleased when I met you, Simon. I believe it was in London a couple of years back,
Yeah.
and then Hunter, joined as well, and so we got to know each other, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we're not the only company from the UK that's joined Download in recent years.
No,
There-
not at all.
Yeah.
And one outstanding member that most of your listeners probably know if they're in the industry is Carrington Textiles, right?
Uh huh. Uh huh.
So yeah.
Yeah, very very major mill and global manufacturing company that I've certainly known all through my career. I think next year I'm 30 years in the sector.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's amazing. I didn't realize you guys were 90 years old as well as us. Um, but given that sort of very technology oriented background that you've had, Rick, tell us about tech as you see it affecting the sector. I mean, you've obviously got your home places in the United States. Most of your members are North American, but it does seem that increasingly you're breaking out into Asia and the UK and parts of Europe and so forth, and it's becoming really it's becoming a global organization. How do you see technology impacting the sector in recent times and maybe in the near future? What's AI doing to it in your view?
So we let me answer that with a piece of our history also. We started as the National Association, which was just US. Then about 25 years ago, Canada said we really should be included in the party. And
Yes,
so we became the North American Association. Then
yes,
Rick comes along, is invited to run it. And I say, hey, you got to give me the planet then. We have to
yeah,
start inviting our supply chain to meet in person with us because much like Europe, much like many parts of the world, we are outsourcing labor, components, and services, even not just
mhm,
physical goods, but
mhm,
everything has become global. And
yes,
the world is flat, as the phrase goes, right? So now we come to a point where not only are we taking for granted that we can manufacture anywhere in the world and have it arrive via not crazy priced transportation, right? It's like, except during the pandemic, we pretty much ship and move things around the planet.
Yeah.
It's basically free. Yes, there's costs, but that's not the expensive part of the manufacturing process. So, but the next level is that, AI is going to influence every step of that process.
Yeah.
So now unless a company is looking at automation and robotics, and the production of goods and services without human intervention, but still with human oversight,
Yeah.
then you will not compete, with what's coming, because there is a tsunami of robots coming. You mentioned Asia. This is built into their plans currently and moving forward, is that they are pushing millions of robots into operations. That's not to say we're not doing that here in North America, and that European operators are not doing it as well, right? We're all automating our warehouses. That's been going on, right? The only reason Amazon, has the monstrous success, well, not the only reason, a major reason that Amazon has this monstrous success we can all look to, has been the automation of these monster warehouses. And we're all learning a lesson from that. We have very large distributors that, and why am I saying that? Because the robots are basically going to be operated and learn, from AI. AI is going to change textiles, right? We're similar to the biotech world, which is going to be hugely affected by artificial intelligence. That's going to filter into our textiles. So, and a company like Hunter, you guys pay great attention to this, actually, because you're involved in the safety side of our industry, right? That's might be different than, someone that works at the front counter at a fast food restaurant. That's a very different experience than a firefighter or a police officer, or right. And so all of those tech, 5 years ago, we would have said, well, you got to have stretch in your fabrics or you're lost. Can you imagine, Simon, 5 years from now, it's going to be, you have to have, molecular temperature control thermostats. It'll be like we're suddenly going to be controlling our apparel using intelligence, not just fabricating it once and saying we're done. It's going to be these living things. I don't know. Am I crazy to think that?
I don't think so. And maybe flying it to the point of need with some kind of aerial robot too. Look, we are also seeing AI just absolutely ripping through everything we do. Every department that we have in the company, whether it be finance, sales, or marketing, or customer services, or tendering, or costing, or designing, or it's just incredible. It's affecting everything, and the pace at which it's affecting everything is truly, truly extraordinary. I guess it's sort of like on a day-to-day basis, we're all reading in our news feeds about AI taking over in every kind of way, and it definitely produces, I would say, basically two reactions. People who are very embracing of the technology, willing to embrace it, get ahead, learn, become faster, more agile, and more able, and those that are kind of technophobe, I guess, who are terrified of the technology and just think that it's going to take their job tomorrow. So yeah, it's definitely changing things. One of the things I think I'm interested to hear your opinion on it, Rick, is I do think that AI has the potential to be a great leveler. Most of the companies in the UK, I was actually, previous podcast I did, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the organization, Plimsoll Analysis. What they do is the chap I had on, Jonathan, his tool in Pencil is an associate, so he's sort of promoting this too, and it's essentially to help forecast the financial health of organizations in this sector, well, in every sector, but they do have a bit of a specialism in this sector. And in the UK, believe it or not, there's something like 700 something companies that they study. You know, we talk about, and I sort of remember this analogy from way, way back. You know, you've got the waterline and you've got an iceberg, and you've got this bit above the waterline and this huge bit below the waterline. And so, you know, probably 600 or high 600s of the companies are quite small below the waterline. You never hear anything about them. And there's this little bit at the top, you know, it's maybe 50 companies, and, you know, maybe that's 50 companies with about 10 in each sector having a certain specialism or niche, you know, and they're the ones you read about, hear about, and see. But so most of these companies are SMEs, you know, they're small to medium-sized enterprises. And what I'm saying is, I think the potential that we have with AI is these really big companies that are very visible above the waterline, SMEs are going to be able to compete, because that kind of advantage that, say, in certain scenarios, that the very big companies had was human resource, you know, lots of expertise, lots of humans. They could throw them at a problem and respond to a client demand of whatever type very, very quickly and pretty professionally. Actually, I think SMEs are going to be empowered to do that really in a way that's going to be equally as potent and equally as agile because of the advent of AI. Were you saying that?
I would agree with you 100%. I will add more nuance in saying that AI will just smash most of the barriers to entry for an entrepreneur. So I believe you will see an explosion of new companies and you know, products and services that are being launched on a regular basis because people can organize it and execute it so much faster.
Yes.
For me personally, I've gotten to the point where I can't imagine doing my job without artificial intelligence as my personal assistant, you know, and that, you know, we're not a big association. We can't hire me a personal assistant, right? So the ability for me to just assemble large amounts of data, organize it, finesse marketing materials, like you were saying, organize sales things, you know, this convention that we organize each year. And each year, the past couple of years, has gotten easier and easier because I understand how to lean on my digital assistant. And so I agree with you that it is a great leveler. I think people fear, not because they're stupid. I think they fear because they lack a model at the moment for, well, what will it look like if all of the accountants, all of the customer service people, you know, and then name 100 other job titles. What if we replaced all of those people? Won't society collapse? And that is simply not the case. You can look to history for many examples of this. Here are two. The transition in, at least in North America, from horse to automobile was one generation, right? We had 80-90% of the people here getting around an urban environment on a horse with a carriage. And then really within 20-25 years, 80% was driving an automobile. Did that suddenly, you know, I mean, there's a lot of people that had to care for horses, and there was a whole horse industry. There was, I mean, yes, if you made buggy whips, you might have been out of business if you didn't know how to pivot to something else made of those same materials.
Yes.
Okay. And then the other example is we used to have, this is true anywhere you live, pretty much, we used to have, you know, 90% of our humanity involved in food production. We had to grow and process all of the food that we all ate. And it was a massive number. I'm making up the 90%, but it was a massive number of people that,
Yeah.
were involved, right? It was pretty close to like maybe it was 80-20. 80% of people were involved in food production somehow, for themselves or for others. And now it's like 2%, 3% here in North America are involved in agricultural production. We found other things for everyone to do, I guess is my point. So we just can't imagine the jobs per se. Some of them we do, a prompt engineer, right? So it's not crazy that Hunter would at some point hire someone that, hey, your sole job is to help everyone else use AI. You're a prompt expert, right? It's like, so there's a job, right? So I think that there's a million potential jobs coming that we haven't even really thought about yet.
For sure.
And AI, so will AI replace lots of jobs? Yes. But historically, that's always been true about technology revolutions.
But even though you see AI affecting your own job and replacing certain things that you do you know what? An AI empowered robot is not going to be able to rock a gold glitter suit like you did in last year's NAUMD event. I don't see that. I don't see that.
That's right. It was called a fish suit, although, and you and I have talked about this in the past as well, we joke about it, but I really do think, Simon, that our industry will be providing textiles for robots. I do think there's going to be a call for, how do we set these up? And there are examples around the planet with traffic robots to start with. They are putting them in reflective vests. They are putting, right?
Of course.
So, same reason we put our household employees in uniforms. No one's going to see them, but we still like that role. We still like to define ourselves and give status to people, for jobs based on what they're wearing. And I think the robots will be similar.
Interesting. What about sizing? And I know when I was at the event last year in Louisiana, it seemed that AI sizing had really taken over it, and nearly every company that I spoke to was using artificial intelligence to size people. And there's obviously a bunch of different ways of doing that, and a bunch of different companies sort of that are in that field. But it seems that the uptake in the United States has been very, very strong. Do you concur with that? Because in the UK, I would say it's not that strong. AI sizing hasn't been really strongly taken up. I mean, we are a company that does champion AI sizing, and but I'm just keen to hear your view. What are you seeing in America? What are you seeing in the USA in respect of that?
So there's so first of all, the event that Simon's talking about is the annual convention that the NAUMD produces. Last year, Simon and I were in New Orleans for it. This year, it's in Boston in May, and that's an annual event we've been doing for 90 years, as we've talked about, right? So not you and I, but the association. So that's our in-person event each year. And I would say definitely for the past half dozen years, the sizing companies have been plentiful. There's lots of them, and they are pursuing the uniform space, right? Yes, they pursue the retail space as well to assist the consumer. But if you think about it, and the reason part of the reason is that it's taking off in the US is just a numbers game. So if we have 160, 180 million people, in the US that in our workforce, and 30% are in the have to wear. There's something that they have to wear for their job. That's a lot of people to size regularly. And as you know, when you introduce a item into a uniform program, if there are 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 employees, every tick of a percentage of return that you can save is a meaningful line item. So I think it's become very popular solely because of economics. I
Yeah.
wish that we were doing it because we want our workers to be feeling better about what they wear. But my guess is that it starts, and it has been sparked here to be used so heavily
Mhm.
because of an economic consideration. Like
Oh,
when we roll this out,
yeah, I wonder, is it because the United States is just such an enormous landmass that, companies are more likely to be spread over bigger areas, and therefore that sort of remote location that you're perhaps more likely to have being an American company sort of drives the dynamics. And maybe, if you look at a country the size of ours, and, it's about 70 million people, I think, across the four parts of the United Kingdom. And as I was saying earlier, 700 and something companies in the sector, a lot of them catering for actually their, part of the reason they exist is geographical proximity to certain companies that are their clients. And maybe that's one of the things that sort of made kind of a readoption of AI in terms of sizing slower in the UK. Perhaps that's what's driving it to some extent.
I don't disagree with that. I think you're adding more nuance to the numbers game, right? And part of that numbers game is where are the employees located? Because then logistics, just adds another little bit to that expense line because you're sending that return or even that initial shipment,
Mhm.
further around. I think we're also a concentration for global companies. So
Yeah.
even if we just pick on the transportation industry, right?
Mhm.
We have these, monster airlines that, have global employee base, or like the UPSs and the FedExes and the DHLs, and right. So
Yes.
that's all. Uh, but yeah, so that is interesting.
I mean, I mean, we started playing around with AI sizing in 2019, and
Mm.
you know, we were learning. We were far from expert in it, in all candor. Uh, but what a blessing it was when it came to 2020, because in 2020, with the best will in the world, the old ways of sizing, sending a team out into the field with lots of sizing sets and moving them about, and being necessarily being proximate to the wearer, was no longer possible because we weren't allowed to move about, and it just wasn't viable to have the proximity that you need to size somebody. And when I started sort of, I just remember waking up one day in early 2020 when COVID had arrived in the United Kingdom, and thinking, my God, AI sizing really has got an angle that we could never have thought about, because people were tending to sell AI sizing as a technology-led service that would save you money. You know, so in other words, here's the saving. We can size you remotely and contactlessly without sending staff into the field sizing sets and having made sort of relatively low production sizing sets of every single item in the collection. So you're moving actually significant quantities of goods from, let's say, Asia by air, lots of carbon attached to that, and then moving those items, let's say, around England, with thousands of staff trying them on. So there was a real carbon impact. There was a real cost and time and sort of operational disruption for the client and the supplier. But actually now with COVID in play, there was a whole new dynamic where you actually couldn't do that. So AI sizing allowed you to size in a remote and contactless way, not having the risk of human proximity, but also not having the risks associated with clothing and fabric being a vector of infection of itself. So in other words, somebody who's asymptomatic coming in, they're recruit number one in the queue, and they come in and they're a medium regular, they try out medium regular item XYZ, they leave the room, somebody comes in, tries on the same item, the fabric itself has been coated in COVID, for example, and by the
Mhm.
asymptomatic person, and all of a sudden they've just given their body COVID, unbeknownst to them, to both of them. So yeah, that was an interesting part of sort of it kind of forced our AI sizing experience somewhat in that we had no choice but to get better at it fast because of those
Yeah.
obstacles. You know, I'm sure it was the same in the US. But
You know, the
touching on that,
contamination issue, the
sorry.
contamination issue is interesting because one of the columnists that writes for our weekly newsletter lives in the Netherlands, and
Okay.
she was shocked to learn that here in the US, we never pass on a used uniform to the next person.
Okay.
Whereas she's like, oh, we do that all the time here. What is, how wasteful of you, you crazy Americans, you're just throwing more stuff away, right? And part of that is, simply because we're so litigious that if you pass something on and it, hurts that person, well, then you're responsible. But it's also this, this concept, like you're saying, of this germs living on the textiles.
Uh-huh.
And so we have very few industries that do that, but my understanding from her is that that's far more common in various parts of Europe, where you would, if you're
Yeah,
leaving a job, you will pass on the uniform to the next person.
it's very interesting. I mean, you've kind of two sort of dynamics in what you're saying there. One is the sort of the sustainability angle, and I'd like to talk to
Mm-hmm.
you about that. It obviously has a significant impact on the sector, but also that other aspect of reuse or recycling, which is potentially contamination of various sorts, whether it's a human transmitted disease or it's contamination from the wider environment. You know, firefighters obviously massively exposed to contaminants and the risk of those contaminants building up in their PPE ensembles and potentially causing cancer. And we talk about firefighter cancer and so forth. And that entire area is very, very interesting, into that space of we talk about health and safety. And most of the time when we talk about health and safety, we're actually just talking about safety. We're not really talking about health. So come back to that. But the first bit of what you were saying was really about sustainability and what you're
Yeah.
saying. You're saying in the US, not so common to reuse. Your colleague in the Netherlands is saying absolutely normal and expected almost to be reused. That I mean,
Well, it's
I would say,
far more common. Yeah.
yeah, I would say in the UK we're probably sitting in the middle of those two
Okay.
extremes to some extent. It is something we're seeing demanded in tenders more commonly. Where particularly outerwear, things that are a bit more expensive, not necessarily next to skin, items that you would expect to have more durability and a longer life, may be demanded in terms of the service provision rather than just supplying the item, but also to take back items from, the guy who lands on the 1st of January and leaves on the 4th of January and they
Right.
give 500 quid's worth of uniform and some of those things could easily be sterilized, cleaned, decontaminated, and repurposed. But it's probably a good add-on for a lot of companies in the sector to do more of that. And I'm somewhat surprised that we haven't seen, the UK going more in that direction of the Netherlands and maybe in the US too. But what's your thoughts?
I mean, we're inching towards, for a number of years now, I've always said, oh, Europe's 10 years ahead of us on sustainability. They're just a decade ahead on any facet of the 17 different United Nations, sustainable points you could, travel down. They're just ahead. Um, but we have pockets of it here, right? Because in a certain sense, our individual states here in the United States can
Mm-hmm.
operate like an individual company within the EU or the European community.
Sure.
And so we do have some states that are starting to enact, hey, you're not allowed to throw textiles away. Are they going to
Yes.
go after consumers right now? No. Are they going to stop large, textile oriented companies from throwing stuff away? Yes. So we're inching towards that. And as we do, we likely will be able to adopt more of the types of use cases you were talking about. Well, is there a way that we could clean this in a way that we are, legitimate in recycling it or reusing, not recycling? Well, no, that's a form of recycling is reuse or upscaling it or upcycling it. I had a major, um, when it comes to recycling and end of life of garments, we're still crawling. We don't know what to do yet. I mean, we're doing things, and programs are popping up. Certainly, our public companies have ESG initiatives that they want to present to the world and say, hey, no, we get it. Here's the things we're doing. Uh, but that's still hit and miss. We don't have unified standards per se, certainly not at a federal level. And some states are starting to force the issue, which is, which is good. I definitely preach, Simon, that
Yeah.
our industry in general, wherever you are on the planet, this isn't just a US thing, our industry could really be a beacon of light and
Yeah.
inspiration in this, because we know exactly what our products are made of every single time. It's not like fashion, right? It's not like we have this season we feature 30 different fabric, right? It's like we know what our stuff is made of every single time. We know exactly where the products are. We're not just randomly selling it to people and then they disappear out into the world, right? Um, and so these are reasons that we can um, be a leader. We could have ways of collecting and recycling and achieving more circularity than the general fashion industry. So perhaps our industry could be offering solutions and back to here's your gift, world that we've figured this out. And there are some examples of it, of ways that we're doing it well as an industry, but we just have so long to go.
In the wider sector, I will say a particular area where the USA is head and shoulders above everybody else globally is in respect of liquid carbon dioxide decontamination. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but yeah, there's well, for sure the world leaders is an American company, and this is where you can clean and decontaminate, complex products, complex PPE products like fire kit, for example, with very very high levels of efficacy. We're talking about being able to remove 99% of the contaminants from a complex piece of PPE using American equipment versus, let's say, getting somewhere in the zone of 15 to 40%, according to an article I read from the Finnish Institute of Occupational Medicine, I think it was. And basically, the main reason for that, I mean, it's a subject matter that I'm very nervously interested in, and obviously my company is involved with decontamination, so you'd expect that, but what it tends to be is, if you take something complex like fire kit, you've got an outer fabric, it's protecting from flame in the main. You've got a membrane in the middle, which helps breathability and waterproofness. And then you've got a thermal insulating layer on the inner. And, it's something that's not commonly or widely enough understood, I would say, is that when you try to then wash the toxicity that's being exposed to that item in the course of its daily work, let's say, and you put it through an aqueous-based washing system, it could never properly work because there's a waterproof breathable membrane. It does what it says on the tin. The contaminants that enter that layer cannot be cleaned because it's a hydrophobic layer. The water with the chemistry in the water that's for the purpose of cleaning will simply bounce off that waterproof breathable membrane. It can't get in. The toxicity remains, typically nanotoxins, and then for example, in the world of a firefighter, when that firefighter gets the gear back from the aqua space cleaning, they think, it's all good to wear. And in reality, that waterproof breathable membrane is highly likely to be full of toxicity. And then when they're moving about, there's a bit of kinetic energy being formed. There's maybe radiant heat coming at them. These nanotoxins can gas off. Firefighters hot, sweaty, their pores are open because they're working hard. The nanotoxicity can enter the pores and enter the bloodstream, and then we get into that kind of area of firefighter cancer. It's a tragic area, but a very, very interesting area. And liquid carbon dioxide really does seem to be the one solution where you can clean something and decontaminate it without water. And that kind of then sort of gets you into that area that we were talking about in respect of sustainability, where you could actually then safely repurpose or reuse those complex PPE items in a way that would be ethically responsible because you've removed the toxicity from them. Whereas, if you were just repurposing them or repurposing them after an aqueous-based treatment, then it perhaps is a questionable thing whether you should be doing that or not. I was in the north of England with my wife at the weekend, and we actually stayed in a hotel called the Gotham, and it was a repurposed fire station. And they had really kept true to the heritage of the old fire station in lots of ways throughout the furnishings and so forth. But, I happened to notice in the reception, they had a cabinet of watches that had all been repurposed from fire gear. So, the watch straps and whatever were various bits of hose or whatever. I have to say, they were works of art, actually, very, very interesting looking pieces. But yeah, that whole area of what, is it actually safe to repurpose these things at all? Do you come across sort of much of that technology in the US?
Well, I mean, yes, in the sense that, contamination is an important part of it. And we have these monstrous, laundry operators, as you do in in Europe as well. But, here actually the laundry industry, by dollar volume, if you will, is a bigger industry than what our network, the NAUMD, is involved in, is more of the direct sale. These are articles of clothing and gear that are manufactured, and then we sell them to the end users as opposed to renting them. So renting becomes a huge factor in what what you're talking about, and we just throw so many chemicals at all of this, right? There's 1,200 chemicals that go into making the fabrics, and then 1,200 chemicals that go into cleaning the fabrics. And I can't help, as you were describing some of this, think about going back to the AI discussion of how we're going to change a lot of that, I imagine, in the next 5, 10, 15 years. When you think about something as simple as, well, it's simple to us now, right? We take it for granted now, right? But so I'm pointing, if you're only listening to audio, I'm pointing at my smartwatch, right? The iWatch. And the number of ways that can calculate my health is astonishing in such that tiny little package. Now imagine, with assistance, that our textiles are going to become that smart, that our textiles would be able to know that firefighter is experiencing some sort of trauma, right?
Yeah.
That there's something about their oxygen level. There's something about, the toxicity, like you're saying, of a shell membrane in the fabric that isn't behaving in an optimal way. And then either it has the tools to do something about it, or it's simply flashing a warning, saying, hey, we need, you need to take this action if it's safe to do so.
Yeah, there's a really interesting project actually in Northern Ireland, and it was very interesting for me, at least, because the university that it's a project called Intoxfire. I'd strongly recommend that you look it up, Rick. I think you'll find it interesting. But Intoxfire is a project hosted from within the University of Ulster, in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I'm an alumni of the University of Ulster, so I have a long-term interest in that university. But I also have a huge interest in contamination, firefighter cancer, PPE, the complexity of it, how do you remove contamination,
Yeah.
and reduce the risks of toxic exposure and, long-term latency disease and all these very, very interesting subjects. And it turns out that University of Ulster actually through this program is actually literally a world leader in the study of firefighting contaminants and so forth. And I was completely unaware of that until very recently. And I can't remember how I stumbled. I think it was LinkedIn or something. I stumbled across something to do with it and reached out and we had the two project leads, Svetlana and Hamid, came up and did a tour of our headquarters, and we talked about this extensively with them, and we showed them our liquid carbon dioxide decontamination facility, and this was a technology that they hadn't seen before, explaining the evidence base, which is largely it's American data that we use to explain the service, if you know what I mean, because it all comes out of the NFPA, which is an American body, so that very, very interesting, the work they're doing and trying to make firefighters safer, trying to make firefighters more aware of the risks. We talked in this sector about back in the day, dirty fire kit was like a badge of honor. How heroic am I? Because I look like a filthy dirty from all the hard work I've been doing, essentially. And now the culture, especially let's say with younger people coming into the fire service, they're sort of going, actually, I don't want to look like that. I understand that there's a real risk of contracting cancer and dying prematurely, potentially in the worst of scenarios. If I behave in this way, it's and that's become a huge part of litigation in the United States. I mean, it seems, obviously I'm interested in it, but it seems like everybody's suing everybody in the US on this subject. It's the NFPA, or I've been told to get sued. Fiber companies are getting sued, and fabric makers are getting sued, and garment companies are getting sued, and all because of these exposures, and not just the contamination that's, let's say, coming in from the external environment at the firefighter and onto their PPE, but this whole piece about PFAS that expands way beyond firefighting. PFAS is on pretty much every piece of waterproof clothing for a start, but it's all on all sorts of external treatments of clothing and uniform. And tell us about this. What are you seeing in terms of PFAS and the move away from PFAS in various sectors, and the awareness of this, and what the risks around this?
So where industry members have been able to easily move away from it with alternatives that are equally effective in keeping a worker safe and healthy, we've done it. And we continue to do it. You are correctly pointing to areas, though, where it's significantly more of a challenge. You get membranes, or you get a protective layering that it is very difficult to currently incorporate a 100% PFAS free alternative and still maintain the efficacy. Am I saying that right? The efficacy of the performance. And that's been that's been the challenge.
Yes.
Yes, there's been a lot of litigation, and I was going to use the word unfortunately, but we don't seem to want to change it. So here in the U.S., that is how change is affected in many cases. And so we as an industry certainly don't begrudge, a class of workers saying, hey, this is, we're seeing correlation here. We're seeing that, there's an illness, and a correlation between the majority, that these people wearing these garments are getting sick. Um, and we leave that then to, science and the courts, to figure out. In the meantime, I know we could pick on, an example of like a Gore-Tex, world famous, material. And what I have heard consultants talking about in this world is in this world of PFAS, saying, well, there's an argument to be made there that there's the Gore-Tex that we could, pursue at a consumer level, and we can put that in, and protection is adequate. Protection is, is fine, is good. Or, and you're more of an expert on all this than I am, Simon, but if we're talking about FR, a world of FR, and firefighters certainly as the most extreme, but even within a world of kitchen workers, right? Like, can we really say that this alternative is going to be as effective, in resistance and fire resistance as this other? And we're challenged to say that. We don't have the science yet to back up these alternatives.
There's
so
usually
we
a
have to say,
trade-off.
well, you need to carve out legally, you need to carve out this space for us and allow us still to protect you, because we need to. If you insist on this other thing, you just need to be prepared that we're telling you it's not the same level of protection.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. I mean, we're hearing, through networks that we're involved in and so forth, that some of these sort of new innovations, the life of the fire PPE could be halved or something like this because of the removal of the PFAS. So
Wow.
yeah, and in a world where everybody's trying to do more with less, and the world economy is not exactly flying right now. I mean, there's maybe some positive signs in some parts of the world that things are picking up, but having your PPE budget cut in half because of the fact that you've removed PFAS is a challenge for people. It just is. It's a real challenge. So, and we were also hearing about sort of burn risks increasing and so forth. But
Right.
I guess the point that you're making is that sort of the litigious nature of American society is also a kind of like a hot prod almost for innovation, and
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it becomes then a problem that you want to solve now rather than later.
And what about other issues in the States? Recruiting. One of the things that I notice is, I mean, we're very fortunate in our own company in this respect. We've got a plumber, a mechanic, a builder, that are subcontractors for our company, but they're people that are they're in the company working on or off all the time. We're always doing something, always building something, always changing something. So they're in and out, in and out, in and out. And as a consequence, they're very loyal to the company and they'll come when we need them. But from talking to them, what I'm seeing at a fundamental level, these kind of skills, plumbers, mechanics, builders, we all depend on it because, we're in buildings, we're in premises, the premises got to be maintained. If you're in any way ambitious and growth oriented, you're going to be doing things progressively to your building. These kind of skills are becoming increasingly scarce in the UK, and like we sort of take it for granted or rely on these kind of specialist trade people. And actually, they're telling me there is just nobody coming through. There's not the next generation coming through. Perhaps we're still suffering from this kind of thing in the UK where most people are getting pushed by their parents into university. You must go to university. You've got to get a degree, and that's all fine and dandy. Well, perhaps it's fine and dandy depending on what the degree is and the degree of the usefulness of the particular degree. But I really do think we need to be pushing more people towards these essential skills like plumbing, mechanics, building. We got to have more of these workers, and we're seeing skill shortages in that respect, but also, more specifically to what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's getting harder to recruit machinists and so forth. And maybe the industry itself just suffers from a bit of an image problem. It's still kind of, I don't know if you have this expression in the States of the rag trade. It's kind of loosely what this industry was called. That I don't know if that's a thing in America, but the rag trade doesn't sound very sexy. And in reality, this industry is very diverse, very, very interesting. There's never a dull moment. And, as a CEO running a company in the sector, one minute I'm involved with a technical and design team. Another time I'm in an AI project. The next minute I'm talking about global logistics. And the next thing I'm sitting with some financial folks talking about the mathematics of a costing model. And, there's all kinds of everything in this sector. And actually it is a dynamic and interesting sector. And probably should never be referred to as the rag trade. But are you seeing skill shortages? Is that a challenge for your members in North America?
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. We are seeing skills shortages in all kinds of ways and areas. You opened up a lot of pieces of operating a modern, company, but let me attack a few of them. The first, I'll start with your last one, which is, this concept of the next generation and what they're interested in. And
Yeah.
one of the things we're trying to do at the NAUMD is we bring university students to our convention each year. We've got 4 or 5 schools that we encourage, and we pay for their travel. We give them the free hotel rooms. And
Yeah.
really, we just want them to be exposed to the industry and go back to their school and tell people what they saw, right?
Yes.
It's not so much that we have to recruit, like, okay, well, now we've gotten 3 people that want to work in our industry. It's that it's that they just don't understand the problems that we as an industry are solving. Another anecdotal example of that is my daughter studied fashion design at Carson School here in New York City in the US.
Okay.
She never would have considered going to work for a workwear company. That was just not part of what they were exposed to, right? Now, some of that is shifting. There's Heather Aku teaches workwear at Indiana University here. We have the North Carolina State University has a massive textile program, and they teach a lot about workwear in their programs. And so we do have some examples of it, but people don't understand or don't appreciate the problems that our industry solves. So if they really want to be on the front lines of sustainability, which we were talking about, if they really want to be on the front lines of textile innovation, then how a textile performs in a work environment is solving many more problems than how it should float on for this season's spring look. But the skills, it's interesting also because you and I were talking about AI and how that's going to assist companies in so many ways. And one could argue that we're going to have robots sewing the garments. In the meantime, we are so scarce on sewers. You talk to any manufacturer, one of the hardest positions, they have to run sewing schools just to fill the pipeline with sewers. They can't just advertise that we're looking for sewers, so come on board, right? It's not just if you offer a competitive or high wage. It's that you have to teach them these skills. Amusingly, also, when you mentioned the plumber concept or the electrician. So many of the news media here in North America, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but they're reporting, hey, you want to hedge your bets? Go into the trades because a robot won't be able to do the electric or the plumbing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Personally, I don't agree. I think they will be able to do the plumbing and the electric at some point. But that's, look, we spent a generation promising all of the young people that if you studied computers, that that's the best way to get to a 6-figure job fastest and without having to use your hands and get dirty. doing plumbing or electrocute yourself. So, you know,
Okay,
it's no
so
wonder that it shifted, because we spent, like you're saying, we spent this 2 generations. My kids were part of it too. No, go to college, study, you know, uh, you'll do this or that. But um, so I don't know how we solve that. We
Mhm.
also have here in the manufacturing sector so many jobs existing that are open right now. Um, and as the baby boom generation retires from working at those factories, we don't have a pipeline to replace that. There's you know 500,000 jobs at the moment open in manufacturing. You know, and there's
Well,
going to be more, and that's just the U.S. And we don't even manufacture that much, you know, here anymore, right? I
what
mean,
what what about UK and US trade? I mean, we're in a moment in time when the relationship between the British pound and the American dollar has changed
yeah,
quite significantly in recent days and weeks, and obviously I mean, as a CEO of not sure, an SME, but still a global trading company, the British pound, as a result of the weakening American dollar, has just increased in strength quite significantly. How long it will stay like that for is anybody's guess. But that does mean that we have the potential to have bigger buying power in Asia, where the dollar is still king, and we're all of our international trading is in American dollars, and so our buying power improves a bit. And if it were to stay like that, then you could have a situation where prices start to stable in the UK, inflation
hmm
becomes a little bit softer, which could be a good thing. On the other sort of wearing another hat, in terms of running a company, we're just about to start exporting to the United States, and with a product that's made in Northern Ireland, and that product's just got a bit dearer because of the currency movement. So you
yeah.
know there's swings and roundabouts for a company like us. But what about sort of the trading between the US and the UK in general within your members? Do you think there's a sort of a push to do more? We've got a trade deal with the US and the UK that's a bit more favorable than, let's say, parts of other European countries or parts of Asia. Do you think that there's going to be a bit more trade? What are you feeling? What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, you're welcome. Uh, that we have, yes, we've maneuvered all of this so that
Our currency.
that that you picked a great time to step up exports to the U.S. I mean, look, you read a headline, across the globe, and the U.S. has done, has gone to great lengths to turn allies into enemies over the past year, right? So uh, I think that that the trade between Europe in general and the U.S. will um, continue to grow despite prevailing winds of political whim. I think that there's just too much interest. I think there's too many people that go back and forth all the time. We love each other's products, and so I think that that will continue. Where China and Asia and all of that fits into that three-legged stool, that's perhaps the bigger question. And in some ways, as you were talking, it made me think, oh, well, in some ways, is the weaker dollar similar to China having the weaker, currency
Mhm,
forcibly? Like,
mhm,
so now we are, in effect, making it more attractive
mhm.
to bring goods and services and production, into the U.S. Um, so I don't know. I heard it described on another podcast even this morning about, we're reindustrializing, or we're attempting to reindustrialize, the US. We're looking for, hopefully, for more production to happen here. Does that mean that even companies like Hunter would say, hey, the dollar is so great compared to the euro, we'll even set up some production, or certainly we'll set up warehousing in the US, right? I mean, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Please bring it.
I think realistically, it's something we have to, if we're going to be serious about exporting the particular product, is a blood trauma armor product that we're going to export to the United States this year. It has to be a consideration that we would set up a plant in the US. It's definitely on the radar. And
Interesting, huh?
it's not something we would have expected a small bunch of years ago.
Exactly.
But we're reacting to what's in front of us. I do hope in terms of US exporting to the UK that we start to see a greater and more abundant supply of Lucky Charms, because it's very hard to buy Lucky Charms cereal here. Very, very hard. If you could speak to anybody connected with Lucky Charms and tell them to send us more of their product, I can't get it.
That is hysterical.
Anyway, but Rick, look, thank you so much for talking to me today. You're running a really amazing organization. Not only the event that you operate, and we're saying it's in Boston this year, but also the Pulse, your digital magazine, and the interviews that come with that, and so forth. It arrived in my inbox today. I was scanning it just before I came down to speak with you.
Yeah,
and I noticed there was an article about British Airways, big UK airline, well, a global airline actually. They're part of the International Airline Group, and the article was detailing the trials and tribulations that they've had. They got on a celebrity designer for all the kudos and so forth that can sort of bring, and it sounds great, but it sounds like they didn't have a great experience, and there's all sorts of issues, and it's something we've seen sectorally. Big name designers come from the world of fashion and couldn't necessarily be expected to be experts of PPE or uniforms of that type. I don't know. Do you come across much of that in the United States?
Well, we definitely come across that. And so in that case, we were simply serving as the news aggregator. We didn't write that particular piece you're
Okay.
mentioning. We're just linking out to one of the aviation news sites that covered the story. But we definitely get that, where you want that celebrity pizzazz because if you're a public consumer facing brand that has employees in uniforms, and especially the airline industry becomes a super competitive, and look becomes super important. So I totally understand how they get attracted to having a designer step in, and our only hope as an industry is that they agree to cooperate heavily with the uniform provider, so that they don't make newbie mistakes that we've just learned from 100 years of manufacturing uniforms, of what the do's and don'ts are. And a real common one is we were talking about sizing. The real common one is the sizing. You don't have the advantage of saying, I make clothing for women sizes 0 to 12. If you're larger than a 12, just please shop elsewhere. We don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
We're sizing women from 0 to 40. I mean, it's the whole of humanity that we serve. And so that's more of a challenge when you talk about design. You got to be able to grade it for every size.
Yeah. I'm sure there's instances where celebrity designers done a wonderful job, and there's definitely a bunch that I've seen where there's been issues. And I guess that from my days in grammar school studying Latin, not that it was good at it, I do remember caveat emptor, buyer beware. So it's one for some of the buyers when they're setting out on the journey for a tender, whether or not it's a good idea to have a celebrity designer, and whether it will suit the overall goal of the project. But Rick, thank you so much. You've been really, really kind with your time, and I'm gonna love you and leave you, but it's been really nice to you, Rick.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure.
God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.